Bergen will share some thoughts with us. She's zooming in, I hope still there. There she is. And then I'll just have a few closing remarks and then we'll be done with our prepared remarks.
Great. And Stephanie, can you hear us?
I can hear you perfectly. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, yes, thank you. And I imagine you've been hearing us all along, so thank you for bearing with us. And I don't know that we've heard from you as a committee in the past, so if you could just introduce yourself and then we'd like to hear your testimony.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone, and it's a pleasure to virtually be with you today. I was enjoying the laughter and chatter in the room, so I wish I could be there in person. But I'm Stephanie Bergen, and I'm a resident of Colchester, and I'm a registered dietitian with the Vermont Department of Health's Division of Health Promotion and Disease Prevention. The Department of Health has been a very proud partner on this roadmap from the start, helping to launch the roadmap's development with $125,000 of CDC COVID health disparities funds, and directly participating in sorting through community feedback and drafting language. And that's because we recognize that food security is imperative for human health and development, as well as directly associated with chronic disease prevalence. Our research at VDH shows that food security status has a significant impact on quality of life, and that includes physical health, mental health, and social and emotional support. We also know that not having access to food disproportionately impacts members of our community. More specifically, as Becca previously mentioned, our BIPOC and LGBTQIA+ communities, as well as Vermonters living with a disability, have a harder time putting food on the table. Examples of the Department of Health's work as it pertains to the roadmap and food and nutrition security generally include administering direct service programs like You First and the well-known Women, Infants, and Children, or WIC program, that serves 7,000 families across the state and provides nutrition education, nourishing food, breastfeeding support, and healthcare referrals. Additionally, SNAP Ed funds and our Healthy Community Design work supports organizations and municipalities across the state to enhance consistent, dignified access to nourishing, adequate, and culturally responsive food today and in the future. And what's so exciting and impactful about this roadmap is that it brings all of these elements of our food system together to elevate a crucial need, and that is Vermonters having enough food. And not just having enough food, but nourishing and culturally appropriate food to really thrive. The Department of Health supports the roadmap's comprehensive strategies to achieving food security, all of which are derived from the voices of people living in Vermont, and many of which are already underway. We are so grateful for the opportunity to speak with you today, bringing to life the public and private collaboration that made this roadmap possible. And thank you so much for your time.
Great, thank you. Stephanie, any thoughts or questions from committee members? All right. Well, then back to you.
Just to wrap up, this roadmap document is here to guide you and all of us in making policy decisions to ensure that all people in Vermont have the food they need at all times and in all the circumstances that we are facing, the times of calm and the times of crisis. And all of us here today and our partners who are watching online and the food bank represented here by John Sales, NOFA Vermont, the Intervale Center, are committed to the actions recommended in the roadmap and committed to working with all of you to achieve food security in the state by 2035. The Roadmap Coalition will continue to be housed within the Farm to Plate network and staffed by the Jobs Fund. So that will carry on as it has been. We're already on the road to food security, and with your leadership, our collective impact will be successful. So we thank you so much for your collaboration. It's been an honor to work on this project. And thank you for the opportunity to share our process and thoughts today.
And if we've got, as I know we do, questions about what we've heard, can we direct them to you?
It's just direct them to me, and then if it's not in my subject area, I'll redirect to others who are in the room.
Okay, good. And just to make it easy for the listening audience, we'll ask whoever's best prepared to answer questions to come up and take the chair at the end of the table. So we'll manage that. If we find that we need to actually switch, we can do that, or we can hold questions for somebody else. But let's see how that goes. Representative Graham and then Representative Wilson.
So I have an overall broad comment question. So on this whole, and I've only glanced through it. And I think the goals are great. But when you get to enacting these goals, it appears it relies heavy on government. And anything to do with government has their hands in means taxes, increased taxes. And when you increase taxes, cost of living goes up. And you're gonna create another section of population that's gonna be food insecure. Is there been any talks about when you get to the tipping point of where people can afford to feed themselves and not rely on government? Because this is strictly my opinion, but I don't see where government does very good at running anything. And I'd hate to see that us have to rely entirely on the government to feed ourselves.
Thank you for that. I think we have seen together as a state and in working with all of you that when the government is involved in policy decisions to create food security, we are successful. And so we're really looking for specific policy development on complicated issues that would require new policy or appropriations that would be novel, as opposed to working lands, for example, a familiar appropriation, or the food bank, a familiar appropriation. We would really be looking to work with all of you to determine how those policy choices are going to be decided. And I think we've also seen over some of the choices that have been made policy-wise over the past few years, we really get, and maybe Anor could speak to this, when we make certain policy choices, it actually brings more revenue into the state. For example, and I'm not going to be able to talk about the numbers on this, but I know that the state is not necessarily taking advantage or being able to access all the federal funding that's available for benefit programs from the Farm Bill. And so Anor could talk about this potentially, just about some financial bits, or if that's a sufficient sort of response about the way we're thinking of moving forward with these complicated questions.
So federal funds are taxed.
It's true. Those are taxes we have already paid. Yes.
So we're still talking tax dollars. And I'm just trying to get a handle on. I don't want to become fully government dependent. Nor should I think anyone should.
Sounds like John has a thought.
Well, why don't we hold your thought, John, and then we'll bring you up if that's okay. Thank you. But I did see a couple other hands. So Representative Wilson.
Well, I just have a quick question. You mentioned stakeholders.
Yes.
Who are the stakeholders?
So generally, I find that stakeholder is a term that's used to encompass anyone who has a vested interest in whatever process you're talking about. In this case, we would call the stakeholders the people who were involved in the roadmap and the people who will be served by the policy choices and the activities that are laid out in the roadmap. So in this specific case, it was folks shopping at a farmer's market in Windham County, for example, the Lamoille Hunger Council members, for example. So,
Okay, thank you.
yeah, thank you.
Representative Brown.
Thank you. I'm not sure my question is for you, but I will pose it anyway. We use the words food sovereignty and culturally appropriate foods and access. And I'm just wondering how we can find balance when some of those strategies in pursuit are really held up with regulatory burdens that sometimes aren't coming from policymakers themselves. They're coming from agencies of jurisdiction or other institutions that are making it quite challenging to reach some of those goals. And so I'm wondering, when we hear things like food sovereignty, what do we mean by that? Because there's certainly pieces of legislation that I think have worked to increase what I understand to be as food sovereignty that would create more resilient, vibrant local economies around agriculture. And I'm just wondering who would like to expand on what you mean by that, and what policy pathways are you seeing that would help us achieve those goals?
So just to be sure I understand your question is about food sovereignty as differentiated from food security, a sort of different term.
Well, we mentioned food sovereignty as one of our goals that would help
Yep.
food security. And
Mhm.
so how are we seeing that play out in the policy realms?
It's true that I cannot answer that question. I wonder if someone feels that they have an answer to that question. Because
Everybody love it.
Is part of what you're talking about sort of the inability as legislators to say, okay, LGBTQ farmers, new farmers will get, no.
No, it's like access to food, like food that folks should be able to have access to, like say raw milk or on-farm slaughter, or any of these things that we know would get more food into the hands of Vermonters if we looked to amend certain regulatory burdens and allowed space for more culturally appropriate actions that can be, part of that process. So I'm just wondering, like, we hear food sovereignty, but what does that actually mean in terms of like a strategy that can be laid out? What can we follow? Because that term is so huge and so weighty.
Yeah.
So what are we doing?
Does anyone feel ready for this
I-
question? Because I can try to answer. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I just love to go there because what sovereignty means is agency and ownership. And when there is a party within that food cycle that isn't owned or a part of that agency, it becomes an obstacle. So how do we eliminate the obstacles in the pathway to feeding people?
So let me just ask Representative Serpent, did you find the term or hear today in the presentation, sovereignty, food sovereignty?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's right here in page 38, establish easier and equitable access to farmland and non-farm infrastructure. It says it also encompasses land access for non-commercial food production in support of food sovereignty. And I just would really love,
I think maybe this will be somewhat helpful, and then it'll inspire others to chime in on this vein. When I share what I think you're hearing, which is a question about the broad terminology that's used in different ways here. And so food sovereignty, what is the definition of that? And I'm sure you've all grappled with what resiliency really is as you took on your resiliency title. I think of food sovereignty and thinking about having control and agency over your own food sources. The state is doing a great job, I think, starting to confront historical deprivation and theft of land and resources from certain groups. And so when we're thinking about sovereignty in terms of land access, we're really looking to the Land Access and Opportunity Board and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to make recommendations for what it might look like to return to a more equalized state of opportunity in terms of land and land for production. So there are, due to wealth inequities and racism and bias, just historical bias in all sorts of different ways that have, kept people from accessing resources, including the land. That ability to feed yourself, to self-determine how you're going to produce your own food for yourself and just homestead, it's not equitable. And so I think the state is doing a great, and as far as I'm aware, very groundbreaking work, really thinking about that. And when we're thinking about the need to conserve our agriculturally productive land, which Abby really eloquently spoke to, the pressures that we're facing, it's very important that we have a commercially viable agricultural sector. And at the same time, I think culturally, for us as a state, it's very important that people have the resources to produce their own food as an accompaniment to the general food supply. And actually, UVM, you've probably been told some of the research that's come out of the UVM shop that's run by Meredith Niles about food security during the pandemic. And she's become very interested in home food production numbers and looking at how people who are more of the cohort she's following, people who are engaged in home food production were more able to recover their food security during the pandemic. And so I think those are the things I think of when we begin to talk about food sovereignty. And I must be honest and say it's not a term that I use broadly. So I'm not the expert.
Monica, do you want to chime in?
Yes, I would love to. And I really speak to it from the perspective of a local community organization. So the way I see food sovereignty play out in my community is that while we receive wonderful help from the food bank in terms of Veggie Van Go deliveries, we never know what's in those bags until the day of. So the person receiving the food doesn't have the opportunity to choose what it is they're going to get. They're just accepting this. And to me, that's something that adds to the stigma of food insecurity. It also takes agency away from people to say, I have enough onions at home. I don't need another 2 bags, or I can't use these really huge radishes. I don't know what to do with them. And while, cooking classes and that sort of thing really help, ultimately, what I would love to see is community members come in and say, I love this food, or I'm interested in trying this. Do you have information on how I can do more with this food? I want people to be empowered to make the choices. And as a local organization, this is where the importance of community involvement in this whole process is really critical, because if we had, as a community, we know our folks, we know the types of foods they may or may not be able to eat. If you have a lot of seniors, we don't, there are certain foods that are more healthy for them as not. So, or we have folks who are diabetics who need to have a different diet, or whatever it is. I think those things are really how we see food sovereignty play out in our communities.
That's helpful. Thank you. So Abby, yeah, no, I see Abby over there, and I just want to.
John had something.
I know John did too, yeah. I just wanted to ask a general question, and then we'll get other folks up. Just because we haven't had a chance to thumb through this, and just wondering about, are there milestones or are there dates, check-in opportunities along the way?
Yeah, this is, there are not. For a while, we thought we would have them. It was really the plan. We were going to have a visual of a road, and there was going to be I-89, and then there was going to be Route 2, and there was going to be a park and ride, and it was all going to be aligned with dates. And what we realized is that we were already on the road together, thanks to all of you and your leadership here in the State House, on a lot of projects that we've begun. We've begun the journey, as Anor was saying, and as Abby was highlighting. So we are really, the urgency of the situation made us want to not keep hesitating and trying to sort out dates that might in the end seem arbitrary before we started working really as a coalition together to plan out the next 3 years very specifically. So that's our task over this year, is to set some dates. There are in the, this is just a random page, but you can see on some of the strategies, there's a red icon, and those are strategies that we identified as needing to happen the soonest and the fastest, and being most useful in order to sequence our work going forward.
Okay. Anything else that you wanted to add? And then, John?
I think I I can't think of anything I want to add right now. John?
Hello, committee. Hi, for the record, John Sales, CEO of the Vermont Food Bank. I live here in Montpelier. And I just had some thoughts about Representative Graham's question and comments about how it seems very focused on government doing things and funding efforts. And I think about this a lot. My perspective is the food bank, which is a private nonprofit organization, like kind of is the organization that is the safety net for the safety net, right? When you can't get government benefits, you can get food from the food bank, right? Because we don't ask. And this is my perspective from the food bank and not the perspective of the entire the roadmap team. But it feels like the roadmap really is focusing on the things that government needs to do, where the gaps are in what the government has been doing. It's not the totality of what's going to keep us food secure as a state. It's going to take the private sector and nonprofits and everybody working together, and people, changing the way or learning different ways to eat and acquire their food. And we need to, as a group, focus on the gaps in what the government is doing as we see it. And of course, we're presenting this to you, and it's a conversation that we're beginning. So I think it's a both and. I don't think the roadmap is an attempt to say it's government's responsibility solely to solve this problem. It's saying, here are the things that we know that government is not doing that needs to do, that's going to help move us down the road. And, I think it's always all of our desire that this makes the economic pie bigger and isn't taking away from one and handing it to another. I just wanted to share that perspective.
Thank you. Abby, I know you had your hand up as well. Do you want to?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to offer a thought on Representative Supernaut's question around the food sovereignty side. So the agency received, I think it's like $1.5 million that came through U.S. Department of Agriculture for this local food purchase assistance program. And we did 3 different grant rounds. The last being one that was like in response to the flood. It was a few $100 to businesses to kind of like reprioritize their investments, but it's really focused on, and one of the examples is like purchasing African eggplant and halal meat and from New Americans, so that then they're able to connect with their customer base and like, again, provide more of this dignified food access that's not just calories, but actually culturally appropriate, the exact type of kind of food and varietals that they're accustomed to and looking for. And I think the hope is, it's a federal allocation that we got. I don't know that we're going to get it again. I think it was part of ARPA. So hopefully, again, part of government's role, kind of like picking up after John's points, are that can we launch some relationships? Can we kind of infuse some resources at the right time in the right places at the right level that help start new relationships, help these food stands in, the Abenaki communities or in these rural places or in downtown Burlington, where they can be connecting with their neighbors and their customers that have similar kind of cultural preferences and food kind of desires. And then the communities kind of evolve from there. I wish that we would have those ongoing resources, and I don't think that we will. So I think that's where this roadmap and this plan and the kind of the concept of the collaboration will hopefully result in ideas and connections that will happen after we've at least launched some initiatives. So I think the $1.5 million was a great start. It's not nearly enough. There was still more demand again for those efforts, but they were an example of really attempting to address food sovereignty that wasn't being government prescribed, but making it happen at a local level and really hoping to help bolster some of those connections. So hopefully that's an encouraging example of something that's happened. And that's all.
Good follow-up.
No, it was more, and just to add clarity to what I was trying to articulate, but maybe like falling quite short, was sovereignty in the face of current regulatory burdens and how we can find the blending of those and what are the current systems that are already in place that are preventing sovereignty beyond just funding mechanisms.
Yeah, I don't know what I have to say on that right now, but I'd love to think about it a bit more. I mean, certainly we've been talking about it from many aspects of like meat slaughter and processing. There's probably other areas that have also come up around the food sovereignty side. I think the concept around the small farm diversification and transition program that that kind of originated in this committee that is sort of active right now is about trying to help overcome some of those barriers that again may not be maybe of like the rural nature or socioeconomic nature, and could be, you know, BIPOC farms that are new and beginning that are really trying to find an opportunity for transitioning or diversification, and removing the barrier of match funding or removing the barrier of competition against larger applications and more established businesses is definitely kind of like the intent of that program. I think part of what we saw in the large demand in response to the Maple Ag Development Grants, again, was like, you know, $18 million in requests. I think it was because it was targeting maple specifically. It wasn't competing against dairy and produce and meat processing and value-added food. It was like very targeted to that sector. As we've talked about, and again, kind of like no match. So I think we're experimenting as far as our granting programs are concerned to sort of see where we have opportunities to shift things a little bit and see a positive response from the ag community. But always open to more ideas, because I think that obviously there's other things we could do.
We are good at that.
Yeah.
Representative O'Brien.
I mean, this might be for you or Ellen or Jake. First we got what we call the Vermont Agricultural and Food System Plan.
Yes.
And then we get New England Feeds New England, and now this, can you talk about how these all dovetail together?
I'm gonna try.
Okay. Great.
It's a very active day there.
It's a very active day. That we are so deeply collaborative. We share one chair. Okay, so the Agriculture and Strategic Plan, which I was here when we presented that to you all, that was my first time I was in this room, lays out a 10-year strategic plan for the state of Vermont to bolster the agricultural economy and meets 3 legislative outcomes that were created by the legislature in the Farm to Plate Investment Program. Okay.
And that was last year.
So that plan is 2021 to 2030 it's covering. So I'm terrible with the passage of time.
Yes.
Okay, so in that strategic plan, there were various strategies. And one of them was, we want to create food security in the state. It's very complicated. It's not just about food access and people having food given to them from Veggie Van Go, which is a wonderful program. It's not just about kids having meals in schools. It is also about public transportation. It's also about the healthcare system. It's about, especially in our state where we value agriculture, viable agriculture in our working lands, it has to center farms. It's very complicated. Just one paragraph in the strategic plan is not enough. We'd like to have more detail. So then this roadmap is that detail. So it's like a little, some kind of metaphor. It's, if the roadmap is the elder father. No, the strategic plan is the elder father and the roadmap is the younger father. So then New England Feeding New England is a collaboration across New England states. It's a caring local. It's a caring uncle. I would say it's more like the fathers went to a party And all the other people at the party are like, wow, you all are amazing. And we're doing some of the same stuff. Let's get together and think about how our party could be really great and we all collaborated. This, we might be losing our metaphor here. But Feeding New England, the project that Ellen has spearheaded is really research laying out the proposition, what would happen if we worked together to create a resilient food supply across the region. What we're doing in Vermont is a very high level of detail on how to enact that and how to have our role as a state within the region really be leading the way. We always think, you know, many of the other states are doing really amazing work. So I don't mean that's inaccurate bragging perhaps, but what we're doing with the strategic plan and now the roadmap is putting things into place, making actions ready to play our part in this larger vision of the regional food system. Is that helpful?
And
Okay.
again, it's reference page 5. You want to sort of remind yourself in time of what that connection is that's laid out in that book, the strategic plan to roadmap, how those things are connected together.
Any other questions? Biddy, does anybody who's here who either spoke earlier or hasn't had a chance to speak feel like there was something came up that they'd like to add? Playing musical chairs all afternoon? Okay, well, thank you then. Thank you for emceeing. And Ellen and Jake, who didn't have a chance to speak officially, thank you for joining us. And you had lots to do with putting this together. We'll look to you if there's a point either later in the session where there's something else that you'd like to, you know, come in and speak more to, or perhaps in the future, since this is obviously looking out a dozen years or so.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity today. It's been great to be here and share our passion for this work to create food security by 2035.
Thanks for walking us through it.